On this episode of The Breakthrough Show, meet an occupational therapist who's passionate about helping children with anxiety, Alicia Kollmar. Alicia helps us to navigate what anxiety might look like in our children and teens, as well as red flags we can look out for. In addition, she answers a tough question about how current events may affect our children's anxiety levels in the long run. Then we'll talk to a Wall Street analyst who claims to have solved the marriage problem, Tim Kellis. With his fresh perspective, Tim shares with us a magic question that will help us in arguments that arise in our marriage and so much more. This episode of The Breakthrough Show is perfect for families and is coming up soon.
Life gives us moments when we have the opportunity to make a choice, and what we choose has the potential to change our lives forever. Join us now for another inspired episode of The Breakthrough. And now, please welcome the creator and host of the show, Jessica Dugas.
Welcome back to The Breakthrough Show. I'm your host, Jessica Dugas, and this is the daytime talk show inspiring you to change the way you look at and live your life through inspirational stories, hot topics, and entertainment. And I'm really excited to be back with you for another episode today. Coming up later on the show, we have Tim Kellis, a renowned Wall Street analyst. You guys aren't going to believe this, who claims to have solved the marriage problem. What is the marriage problem, and has he solved it? You're just going to have to stay tuned and find out. But coming up first, we have an occupational therapist joining us at the Hot Topics table with more than 21 years experience. Please welcome Alicia Kollmar to the show. Alicia, it's great to have you here today.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here.
It's awesome to get to sit down with someone that is passionate about working with children, because I have a couple, running around my house. Most people that watch the show know that it's a circus around here. And so any, good tips and advice we have on the show for moms and families and children, I think it's a great thing. Alicia, I would love for you to start out by sharing with us something that's bringing you joy today.
Joy is, there's a lot of things bringing me joy every day. Today, I'd say it's that I'm going to get on a plane and go see my family in Oregon. So I'm in North Carolina, and I'm real excited to go see people I haven't seen for a while.
Awesome. Very exciting. And is this the first time you've really traveled at all recently, or have you been kind of traveling?
Oh, no. Yeah, I have not been traveling. Definitely not.
What? Why? That's awesome, though, that you get to go see your family. That's always, I think, a nice thing for me to get to go home as well. So I appreciate the looking forward to that. For sure. So I know you've been an occupational therapist for a long time, but you're very passionate about anxiety issues and specifically with children. What made you get, an interest in that?
Well, I really just started seeing it become a bigger issue. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know what I could do about it. So particularly in middle school, I had a couple of kids one year that I was working with that just, one of them I knew in elementary school. Once he got to middle school, it's not the nicest way to phrase this, but he looked like the female of the bad road. He just looked like he was so stressed out. And I wanted to know how I could help him and other kids. And I started to see it more. We've also started to understand more about how anxiety presents in children. And I've seen that it's really impacting families. It's impacting children and their education and their everyday lives. And I wanted to do more about it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I saw and when I was researching a little bit about you and your work is you were sharing about how we often think when we see anxiety in children that it's the shy child or the one that's kind of the recluse or keeps to themselves or something like that. And for me, that was kind of the case. When I get anxious, I kind of go in my little bubble. And so when we had issues with one of my children with anxiety, it didn't look like that. And so I didn't think that there was an issue with anxiety because that's not how I associate it. What are some of the other behaviors that we see in children that may not say to us, hey, they're having issues with anxiety?
Generally, big reactions to what we would consider a small problem is, the big tantrums, especially for their age, being particularly controlling. And lots of times those behaviors, might be hitting, might be throwing things, might be just yelling. But it looks a lot different in different children. But generally, it's a big reaction, what we would call a tantrum. So we don't expect, adults have tantrums too, right? We all have our moments where we have a big reaction to a small problem. But, we're seeing that more often and not appropriate to a child's age, particularly.
How much, because I know we're going to be talking to Tim a little bit later about marriages, how much really does the family dynamic play into the anxiety level in a child?
It's huge. I mean, anxiety is contagious. And I will say that, some children are just born being more sensitive too. So sometimes it's just part of their temperament and what they're born with, but lots of times it's what they're learning from their parents. And sometimes that sounds a little harsh, but you're modeling how you can respond to a problem and how things come up. And that's really how I define anxiety a lot of the time, is not knowing how to respond to a problem. It's a problem solving problem. When you know what to do, you don't tend to have anxiety about it. I mean, we have some normal anxiety, like me coming on this show, right? There's this level of typical anxiety, but I can use strategies for myself to talk through it. I rehearse in my head, those kind of things that make me more comfortable. But, when you don't know what to do, and kids don't, they have limited life experience. So they're learning from parents, and, it really can affect your everyday life.
Is it possible to turn it around, or do you think that that people that have anxiety, that it's something that they then have to be mindful of the rest of their lives?
I think that for children, I do think that they can move past it. Particularly for adults and older children, sometimes if you're using it as a definition of yourself, sometimes that's, to me, I think feels like a little more of a challenge to get past that. If you can see it as something that used to be in the past, or, I used to have issues when I would encounter something new, or I used to have issues, and you can see it as something that is, that you've moved through, then it might be something that's not going to be there forever. But some of us, I would say I was an anxious kid. I was the shy recluse kind. I didn't like to interact. I had no idea how to interact with other people. And, here I am, right? I started my own business. I'm here on a Zoom and on a podcast. So I do think it's something that you can move past, for sure.
Yeah. Is there, do you think, because I know for me, when I was younger, I would have anxiety issues, but it would be intermittent. And I was really good at sort of adapting to my environment. And I think that was a great coping mechanism at the time. There's a lot of people that had no idea that I dealt with anxiety when I was little, because I was very, I guess what you would call high functioning, in that I just continued to do the things and just was blowing up inside, And I think that there are a lot of children that are like that, because, as I mentioned, one of my children, you really wouldn't know until he gets to that sort of outburst point. And so is there anything that we can be recognizing in children as being sort of a red flag or anything like that, when they seem like they might be fine otherwise, or if it's an intermittent thing like that and it's not an all the time anxious, cloud hanging over?
I would say that sometimes it's a resistance to doing something new. Parents, especially, you're going to see that children might have more issues at home than they do at school. So you may not recognize, the teacher might be saying, hey, there's such a sweet child, right? Because they're like you, or like I was, we're following the rules. It might just be occasionally we feel those ways. And so what happens is, a lot of times we do that, what we call masking, or we hold it together during the day. And then we get home to our safe place, and then parents are feeling it. And just one thing I want to make sure to mention, because this may resonate with your audience, especially if there is a family that's been separated, where the parents have separated. Sometimes the child might have more issues at one home than they do at the other. And what I have found is that sometimes it's because, for instance, the mom is not remarried and she's feeling it, and dad's remarried and he's not seeing it and he doesn't get it. Well, lots of times there's other people in the household that aren't that safe space to them, as step parents, step children, where a child is not going to have those same reactions there, because technically those are like outsiders to them. Even if they like those family members, even if they all get along, even if they love them, they don't still have that same safety net that a parent does. And so sometimes there can be conflicts between parents because one might see things as an issue and the other one's not. So, we're going to see some bigger reactions, more resistance, more controlling behaviors, trying to direct the show all the time. And sometimes kids are just leaders and that's what they do, right? But can they go take it the other way, right? So can they be directed by other people too? So.
Yeah, it's really interesting because our dynamic in this house, I had 3 children when I came into this marriage, and my husband adopted my oldest 3 children. And but we both, like, it's been this journey of trying to get on the same page with, because we all have different opinions of how things, should be, especially when it comes to children. I tell people all the time that are having kids, they're like, oh, what book I should get? I say none. Literally do not get a book there, because every child is so different, and there's no one answer that's going to be the savior of your family situation. And so it's been a journey of getting on the same page, but you can definitely see the anxiety level go up in the whole house when we're not on the same page, when we're trying. So I think that, conversation is really important for us, of trying to figure things out before we present it to the crew, But I also want to quickly bring up kind of what we've been going through as a society with everything that's gone on since 2020, from the pandemic to politics to, there's just a lot of anxiousness in the air, I think. And I know, as I mentioned, we've had anxiety issues with one of our children, and it was a lot because of the health issues that I had, and them having to witness me going through all of that. And even with my own coping mechanisms and all of that, it's still, I think when it's your parent, it's like that constant, like, what's going to happen and what's going on. And so now it's not just me. Now we're seeing this on a global scale. What do you think that the long-term effects are going to be with anxiety levels with children because of everything we're seeing going on?
I definitely think it's going to have an impact throughout their childhood, and we have to be mindful of all that right now. I think already, I don't really know the purpose of why anxiety has already ramped up now compared to what it used to be. I think some of it was the masking, and we were just hiding who we were when we were anxious. I think 9/11 had an impact on a lot of us. If we were, old enough to understand what was going on, if we were adults at that time, and then we had the kids, that was something on our soil that's never happened, and it hasn't happened since, and it's created this anxiety, I think, just already for a lot of people, that even if they don't necessarily tie it to that, it's just, there was this big event that was 20 years ago, but also I think affected people. And now what I would really encourage people to do related to things like health issues and the pandemic, our worry talk as adults it really impacts kids. Right. Our worry talk becomes their worry talk. So I really encourage people to have rules, to make rules about those things. So, your rules, if you have an illness, my rule is that, if this happens, I just need to take a rest. I need some time to take a nap, or I need, our rules to be safe is that we wear a mask. And as long as we follow the rules, we're just going to be matter of fact about it. We're not going to put the emotion into it. We follow the rules by washing our hands when we go to a new place and by wearing our masks. And right now the rule is that we stay home, and the rules might change a little, but we don't have to otherwise worry about it. So if we, same thing with things like severe allergies or bee stings, those kind of things, food allergies, we just follow the rules. You only eat the food I pack. And then you'll be safe. We can make an action plan that you can leave the classroom if someone brings a peanut butter sandwich that day and you're allergic to peanuts. So we just make rules about it instead of trying to charge it up with emotion. And at this point, we're all charged up with emotion from it, I think, but it's also become a bit of a norm for us. And so we can just talk very matter of fact about it because it's just our life right now. And that might help stave off some of the anxieties associated with it.
Great points. Great points. I think it's, like you said, we're all kind of charged with emotion, and we've been for a year and a half. There's just a lot, that goes into all this. And I think it's also good to, create that space where if they are feeling something, that they are safe to express that as well. And that's something that we've tried so hard in our house to just say, I would rather you say how you feel than to and risk that I won't understand than to not say it at all. And then, I don't even have the opportunity to try, so it's you've given some great tips. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I want to hear a little bit more about that. We are going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk to Tim and more with Alicia at the end. We'll be right back for more of the Breakthrough Show. Welcome back to the Breakthrough Show. I'm really excited to have my special guest on today, who I had found in a podcasting community, and he made a very, very bold statement saying he solved the marriage problem. And I thought to myself, oh, well, he's either full of it or I've got to have him on the show. I'm glad that he's here today. He was a Wall Street analyst, and now he is tackling that problem, which is divorce. And it's something that tends to be a little bit of a hot button topic, but we're going to do it today. That's what we do here on the Breakthrough Show. So please welcome my very special guest to the show, Tim Kellis. Welcome, Tim.
Jessica, thank you very much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you allowing me to come in and talk on your show. But yes, I have solved the marriage problem. You'll find that to be true when we're done with this. So it's all cool.
I hope so. I hope so. Well, I know I mentioned a little bit that you were an analyst on Wall Street. So that's a far cry from working on marriages. Tell us a little bit about how you got into working on Wall Street, and if that were you as passionate about that as you are what you're doing now?
Always, yeah. In fact, I'm on my 5th career. I've lived in 7 cities in my adult life. I don't know what his plan is, but I know he's got some plan that's not a straight path. I don't think any of us have a straight path. In fact, what's interesting about my background is I do not have a psychology background. And in fact, that turns out to be significant when you understand the psychology industry. But the point is, I have an engineering degree, an MBA, and I was actually the first semiconductor analyst on Wall Street to focus on the communications market. So a couple points about that background. Number one is I am very analytical. So obviously what I've done is I've approached marriage in the same way I did my job as a Wall Street analyst. I'm considered an expert on Wall Street in both the semiconductor industry and the communications industry. I could spend the next 2 hours telling you how your phone works. I won't, but I could.
We'll pass on that today.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is I had well, and then the other thing is that this is not my first original thought. It's my second original thought, solving the marriage problem. But it was a relationship of mine that was supposed to go the distance. You know, this is actually a girl that I'd known for like 8 years, but she'd always had a boyfriend and I always had a girlfriend. But when we got together, and like most relationships that lead to, you know, spending the rest of your lives together, it happened very quick. We got to know each other very quick, you know, fell deeply in love, and then started fighting. And then quite honestly, when we went to the therapist, it was more that the therapist wasn't helping than that our relationship wasn't working. Because in our society today, we instinctively think, well, we're having marriage problems, we'll go see a marriage therapist. And very few people really understand what goes on behind closed doors. And when I really realized what goes on behind closed doors, that's really what motivated me to doing this. What I do that's unique is I address marriages mentally, and believe it or not, nobody else has ever done that before. I basically have researched and I discuss marriages more conceptually. When you understand marriage as an entity, as an, you know, sort of an institution, and the way it is today, the way it's supposed to be, and then when it's not that way, how you get it to being the way it's supposed to be. That's what I do. It's a partnership. That's all it is.
So you describe this as being, you know, the marriage problem being divorced, but obviously there's underlying things that lead to that. What do you think are the biggest things that lead to that biggest problem, which is divorce?
The only reason why I can comfortably and confidently tell anybody that I have solved the marriage problem, put my career, my education, put all of that aside, the only reason why I can tell anybody that I have solved the marriage problem is because I forgave my parents when I was 25 years old. It turns out the most significant element in a marriage is the relationship with the parents. Unless you were molested as a child, which is a sidebar in where mental issues come from. If that's not the case, then it's the relationship with the parents that have the biggest influence on a marriage, because that's where you first learn about love. What I basically do is I discuss the concept of mental development. And what mental development conveys and absolutely implies is that the earlier you are in the development stage, the more vulnerable you are to lessons that may not be positive lessons. And obviously you're the youngest at birth. Who are your biggest influences at birth? Your parents. And we learn love from our parents. Your parents got divorced, for example. So now you've introduced that fear into your marriage. And unless you realize what you need to do to psychologically heal from that fear is going to be a significant motivation in your marriage.
Yeah. So does this mean that if we've experienced divorce or we haven't had a good relationship with our parents, that we are not marriage material, Tim?
That's not it at all. No. I'm here to solve the problem, to not to define the problem. To define a problem without discussing the solution is being judgmental. And in fact, couples need to learn that with conflict, because all I'm doing is I'm teaching couples conflict resolution. How do you solve the marriage problem unless you solve the marriage problems? Here's one of my big breakthroughs, Jessica. You'll laugh at the simplicity of this. The reason why relationships are successful is because couples get along. The reason why relationships are unsuccessful is because couples don't get along. Exactly. That's all it is.
What do you mean, Tim?
Exactly. That's all it is. But what I'm doing, Jessica, is I'm making the concept of conflict resolution a conscious element of the marriage. Most people live their marriages unconsciously. Something happens, they both react instinctively. They don't sit down and think about it, think it through, think about it from, in fact, the most significant aspect of a marriage being successful. It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When most people see that line, they look at what? The pursuit of happiness part. What I do is I break down life and liberty. Life is morality. All life is precious. It's taught to us by the church. And when it comes to relationships, morality is empathy or understanding your partner's feelings. Liberty is a political concept taught to us by our government. It's equality. Equality in a marriage, when it comes to relationships, is respect or understanding your partner's thoughts. In fact, I don't know if you ever read To Kill a Mockingbird when you were a kid, but there's one line in that book that changed my life. And that line is, if you want to understand a man, you have to walk in his shoes. I remember reading that as a kid, thinking to myself, wow, that is extremely profound. And I live that every day of my life. If you do not understand your partner's perspective, how are you ever going to solve any problem?
That's very true. And I can completely see about this, going back to the stuff about, how the relationship with your parents and what you see growing up, and if you see divorce and all of that tying into a lot of it as well.
So I break down conflicts in two directions. The first is a disagreement. Okay, you and I are business partners. You and I are going to start a business together. I'm the finance guy, and you want a $5,000 computer. Okay, we don't have the money for that. How are we going to solve that problem? We have to discuss, obviously. You and our business partners. There's no emotional component to our relationship. We're a professional relationship. That's logical. You have your side. Here's why I need the $5,000 computer. I have my side. Well, my budget doesn't allow whatever. And then that's where obviously you get to the concept of compromise. But the issue is when our conversation turns emotional. Jessica, you're such a jerk. That is now an emotional comment. That is now, we have now turned our conversation from logical to emotional. Arguments are a control mechanism. That's what arguments are. What I do when I'm calling you a jerk is I'm trying to force you to agree with me. I'm not listening to your side. I'm only listening to my side. And the point is, what I do is I break arguments down into their component parts. Okay. It turns out there's a mental process that we go through that leads to anger and judgmental. It starts off with the insecurity, which we know in the public is a fear and anxiety. Okay, just so you know, insecurity is a public concept. It's not a psychological concept. Psychologists call them by medical things like disorders or neurosis or pathologies. They call them, they declare inaccurately, by the way, that our mental problems are medically based. It's not true, but that's what the psychology industry believes because of Freud's biology theory. When we say insecurities, that is a cultural concept. What you find out with the notion of common sense is that when our leaders fall behind what we as a culture are developing, we figure it out on our own. And because the psychology industry is still staying with the biology theory that our mental problems are medically based, they declare that they're a medical condition, which is not true, but that's what the industry says. We as a culture call them insecurities. And so we know outside of the industry that our mental problems are insecurities. But the point is that insecurities lead to prejudices. Okay. Relationship prejudices. Again, your parents got divorced. Now you have a preconceived opinion that's not been thought out about your own marriage. Okay. And what's so cool about it, it turns out that our mental problems are prejudices. That's what our mental problems are. Okay. And we develop, obviously, the most volatile part of that conversation is our relationships because they're so emotional. And if we don't understand what's going on, if we're in an unconscious mode, we let our problems control us as opposed to us controlling our problems, which is what free will is all about. Okay. So we develop relationship prejudices. Mom and dad got divorced. I now have a fear that I've not thought through about you as my partner based on my past, which then leads to being judgmental, which then leads to anger. And the point I make when I have that entire conversation, in fact, the great thing about the prejudice concept is we have so much social experience with prejudices that we could draw from. In fact, the best relationship book I believe that's ever been written is not one that's been written by a doctor, but one that's been written about a doctor, and that's Martin Luther King. Civil disobedience. You and I could disagree until the cows come home as long as we're civil about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the other part, to fight fire with fire will do nothing but increase the existence of evil in the universe. Hate begets hate, anger begets anger, violence begets greater violence. We must meet the forces of hate with the forces of love. We must meet physical force with soul force. But what I say when I'm explaining that is not that you're a wallflower when your partner gets mad at you. Because what you're describing, when that guy and that girl get together, their relationship is going to lead to an argument. Okay. So let me give you an example. He comes home late from work and she gets mad at him. Okay. The fight or flight instinct is going to mean, how is he responding when she gets mad at him? He's defending himself. Now, the caveat of this conversation is that he is behaving morally. If he is out drinking with his buddies and he knows he's not supposed to be doing that, he doesn't have a clear conscience to do what I'm about to explain to you. But if in fact he did get that phone call at 5 o'clock and it took an hour, what I've been trying to do, this is a question that I've asked myself that took me years to figure out. And that question is, how do you respond when you're not really doing anything wrong? Coming home late from work, is that really doing something wrong? It's subjective behavior, but how do you respond when you get in trouble? And the answer to the question is, what are you afraid of? So I come home late for work, my wife gets mad at me. Instead of responding, well, I had this and I did this, and she's, yeah, but you said this. We go back and forth, which is the way arguments occur. If I can, in an open-minded perspective, because I'm not doing anything wrong, turn the conversation back towards her. Because she didn't get mad at me because I came home late from work. She got mad at me because of her abandonment issues. She's afraid that I'm going to leave her if I'm not keeping in touch with her. That's when her subjective perspective is the cause of the problems in our relationships. And when I can't tell you how many couples I've taught this to, how many people I've talked this to, that when they ask their spouse the "what are you afraid of" question, that it stops an argument in its tracks, because it keeps the conversation logical. And once you realize the root causes of that argument, now you're addressing the root cause, not the coming home late from work. In fact, the title of one of my favorite books is called "There's No One to Blame." If couples were to realize their argument has nothing to do with it.
Let's take the example you were talking about coming home late, and so say you have this she's mad because you came home late, and then he says, what are you afraid of, right? And she goes into being afraid he's going to leave her, he's not going to come home, and all of that. And at that point, is it like the realization that, well, that's her issue, or is there this compromise that needs to happen?
Our goal as a couple is to grow together. That is the goal. And that is exactly what this does. Okay. As it turns out, we are supposed to be born twice. The first is obvious, biologically. But the second is psychologically, when we're supposed to be born into adulthood. And unfortunately, there's always pain before a child is born. Okay. When I forgave my parents, it was emotional. I cried. I called them up and apologized to them, forgave them. And here, so let me explain forgiveness to you for a second. Okay. This is how weird I am. I have a mentor of mine who is translating the oldest Bible in existence that was written in Aramaic. Jesus spoke Aramaic. He didn't speak English. And when you study the history of Christianity, you realize that one of the issues that has happened along the way is the translation of the Bible.
Right.
Okay. And if you know the steps, it was Aramaic, Greek, Latin, modern languages. And what this guy discovered is I call it the dilution of forgiveness. The way that the Greeks translated forgiveness is to pardon. So the way you forgive me for calling you a jerk and forcing you to buy a $500 computer is you pardon me. But that does not eliminate the anxieties that I've created by forcing my will onto you.
Right.
What Jesus actually said was that forgiveness means to cancel. So the only way you can really forgive me is to cancel the negative emotions that you develop because I forced my will on you. And that is a cathartic experience of release. And what's so fascinating about that process is when you get through it. My parents destroyed my childhood. My parents were the worst thing that ever happened to me. They were unimaginably cruel to me until I forgave them. And once I forgave them, guess what? I realized the value of what they did. I am who I am today because of my parents, and I'm not a bad person. So when you get through the forgiveness process and you release those anxieties and you look at that perspective from a whole new perspective, you look at that situation from a whole new perspective. And I'll tell you quite honestly, what I did was I looked at it from their perspective, not mine. And that's what you're trying to do. It's painful. It's hard. And when you learn, say in our example, he comes home, she gets mad. If he were to learn that he is there, here's relationships today are controlled by the lowest common denominator. The person who screams the loudest is the person that controls the relationship. What I am teaching is where the highest common denominator now determines the direction of the relationship. And so the one who doesn't have those issues can pull the other one up with them. And that's what he's doing when he's sitting next to you. Go, listen, sweetheart, I love you more than life itself. You're my dream. We're going to spend the rest of our lives together. Let's talk about this. So let's get into that. And then we get into abandonment. Mom and dad got divorced. So let's talk about that relationship. And he becomes sort of her mini therapist. He helps her heal through that process. He's a shoulder for her to cry on. And then when he gets angry at her and she turns around and what are you afraid of? They both get to heal each other. That is the definition of growing together. And what makes it so fascinating, how much closer do you think those two are going to be once she is released from her parents getting divorced? And he's the one that helped her get through that. That's called transference, by the way. Okay, and what we've not learned yet, this is the big psychological question that we're all trying to figure out that I have answered. We are not aware yet how we could live with ourselves. A balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. It's when you're better than you used to be. That is the billion-dollar concept that we all individually are trying to figure out. And what that means is, as much as I'm really trying hard not to upset you, I'm being funny, Jessica, as much as I'm really trying hard not to upset you, because I'm a moral guy, but if I do upset you, you do not define me. I define me. That's why forgiving your parents is so significant, because if you don't, there's where your first links come from, your first insecure connections come from. You're still in that childhood stage where your parents are defining you. And if that's where if you take that into adulthood, not only are you letting your parents define you, you let everybody else define you. Why do you think our Hollywood celebrities are so screwed up? Because they let the public define who they are. It's very hard to find just so you know, I psychoanalyze celebrities for a hobby. That is how weird I am.
Oh my gosh, come back and talk about that. I could.
Oh, absolutely. I would love
to.
But there's a reason why divorce is so rampant on Hollywood. In fact, it's the reason why if you find a couple like, you know, Tom Hanks and his wife, and even like Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, who aren't married but are still together, when you find couples that have stayed together for a long time, it's like they have two heads. What do you mean you're still together? Are you weird or something? There's something wrong with a couple who stays together. We're a couple that breaks up. It's now a PR opportunity. We broke up, so it's in the press and there's all the news about it. But it screws up Hollywood celebrities so much because they don't understand who they are. And it has nothing to do with their looks or their money. Who you are is an internal quality.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is all so good. And I'm so grateful that you came on today to give us such a fresh perspective of all of this, and a perspective that doesn't come from the normal, like, you know, you're laying on the couch like we see on the
the TV and in the.
Do you realize that Freud placed his famous couch away from him because he couldn't stand having people look at him for 8 hours a day? That's how little Freud actually cared about his individual patients.
Very
He was interested in solving the problem, not healing people.
Right.
He was interested in being famous. He created a religion, not a science, with his concepts, and that's really interesting to understand. But yeah, that started with Freud. Freud hated his individual patients. He didn't care about them.
Oh my gosh, the things we've learned, so many things that are really just little tidbits like that we didn't know before. Now we know them. Tim, tell everybody how they can find you and work with you and all that fun stuff.
Well, the easiest way is to email me. And my email address is Tim Kellis. The last name is Kellis @Happy Relationships. Yes, I own that domain name. Relationships, plural. Tim Kellis @happyrelationships.com. And the other way they can get a hold of me is I actually on Facebook have founded the Marriage Support Group. And you'll see a picture of a couple kissing. And I have almost 1,900 members and growing in that group. So they can always join that group as well. And if anybody who's listening has discovered Clubhouse, which is the next thing, okay, Clubhouse is going to be the huge next breakthrough in social media. It's an audio only social media app. I host a marriage conversation. It's interactive, by the way. It's an unbelievable opportunity for people to do kind of, spur of the moment conversations. But every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time, and my handle, so to speak, is @Tim Kellis. So follow me there and you'll get notification of my weekly calls on marriage, where I bring in, last Wednesday, I had 13 other marriage experts join me. And we all, my mission is to lower the divorce rate in this country. And I'm doing everything and anything to make sure that happens. There's no ego here, only a mission. And my mission and my passion is to lower the divorce rate in this country. And I have the knowledge and ability to be able to do that. And I just need to get in front of more couples and explain to them what we talked about here today and what I teach. And once that happens, like I said at the beginning, you'll realize that I have in fact solved the marriage problem. Isn't that how we started this conversation off? So I'm not crazy, just so you know. I try not to.
Well,
but
I mean,
my mission is to lower the divorce rate in this country. What?
I mean, it's debatable, but no, you're wonderful.
Exactly.
And
Oh,
thank you.
Believe me, you don't want to live
much.
in my mind. Yes, I'm crazy to myself. That's for sure.
That's the vast majority of guests and co-hosts and panelists that we've had on this show. We're all a little off, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for being here today, Tim. It was really great to have you and to hear your as I said, very fresh perspective. We appreciate you.
Jessica, again, I can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity of helping me get my message out. This means more to me than you can even imagine, but thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And we'll be back in just a minute for more of the Breakthrough Show.
Breakthroughs are about more than you might think. They're about discovering who you are, digging deep, reaching to the core of your soul. They're about healing yourself, understanding your beliefs, creating a ripple effect. And it's not just those initial moments that matter. It's about using them to bring more joy into our own lives and the lives of others. It's about having fun, letting loose, enjoying every moment life has to offer. It's about finding a safe space. It's about creating connection. Join us each and every month for exclusive programming, where we invite you to go beyond the breakthrough. So we ask you, are you ready? We'll see you online at
thebreakthroughshow.com. Welcome back to the Breakthrough Show. Big thank you to our special guest, Tim Kellis, today for talking to us about marriage. And we're back now with Alicia Kollmar. Alicia, thank you again for being here today. I know you gave so many amazing tips in our first segment that are going to help parents with children with anxiety and at least even know what to look for. They might not even know that their child is having issues with that. So now they'll have open eyes, and we appreciate that. Tell us a little bit more, Alicia. I know you're an occupational therapist and you do the work with anxiety, but what else do you do in your work?
Well, I work a lot with children who also have autism, anxiety, and that's, not anxiety, ADHD is what I was trying to say. Anxiety comes hand in hand with a lot of those. So OTs are often really good at that neurodiversity and how to address things there. I have a private practice in Apex, North Carolina, where I work directly with the kids, and then I contract to schools. So wherever I can, I also try to support the kids in the schools if I can, and educators so that they know what to do with kids. And then I have a book coming out for occupational therapists about pediatric anxiety and how to assess it and treat it, and support parents with it. So
awesome. So I had a question about the parent side of things. I know that you mostly work with children, but I think sometimes when our children are going through things, especially with mental illness, whether we're dealing with or mental challenges, whether we're dealing with anxiety, depression, any kind of learning issues, ADHD, autism, anything like that, we can take it on as parents and feel like we've somehow failed. We've somehow done something wrong. If we know, like some of the situations we were talking about of being on a different page with our spouse in front of our children or arguing in front of them, we can go, I shouldn't have done that, or, just really beating ourselves up as parents. Do you have any words of wisdom or hope or anything that you can offer the parents watching who are maybe in that place of going, I failed somehow?
Well, I think we all tend, especially women, tend to do that. But I try to have the mantra of know better, do better. So, now if it's not like your child is broken. If you did, we all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. Nobody's giving you a handbook to be a parent. And certainly with mental health issues, they're rampant, they're everywhere. And sometimes it's really has nothing to do with you as a parent, and it is the makeup of the child. You can support your child, but if you are loving your child and doing the best that you can, which I'm sure that you are, just remember, when you learn, then you change. When I was I was a young therapist. I was doing things I can't say that I was real proud of. And in hindsight, right, we were very focused on compliance with children. And now it's more like supporting kids and meeting them where they're at, and not abusive or anything, but that was like the mindset at the time. And I think that still is in some places, which is why I'm like excited to be here and get the word out to people to understand children's behaviors more. But you can't stay in the past. You're here in the present, move forward, and you got this now.
Yeah. Thank you for that, for the words of encouragement. I know it's not easy for parents, I think especially in a different time. I talk to people all the time about this. It was different when we were younger and we didn't have social media and a lot of the pressures that there are today. And I sit here every day going, I don't know how we're navigating this because it's so different than when we were younger. And I imagine that while it was different for us, for our parents, when we were younger than when they were younger, there's this explosion of the online world, and social media, I think, has really just taken things to a new level. Have you seen that affect the anxiety in children as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that children have done is that they've been self-regulating with a device. You're upset, here's an iPad. And so sometimes they don't have those internal coping mechanisms because they're not really put in a position to do that. But that iPad's not always there for them, or, you're not going to have that. So, a lot of the internal skills haven't necessarily been learned. And definitely the online stuff, sometimes it's a great escape for kids, like the video games and things like that. Some kids really do value those moments to have that peace. So if it's not taking over their lives, I do say don't necessarily take that away from them. Yeah. But especially as kids are approaching middle school, there's a lot out there that can add to the stress.
Yeah. Moving on. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. And we're, I think those of us in our generation, we're trying to figure out how the hell it happened so fast. We're just going, I don't, I feel like it was just yesterday. I was riding my bike and that was enough.
Right.
Etch a sketch, something, so is there anything in particular that you feel like you bring to your practice that is different, or maybe anything that's super fun for you to bring into your practice, or something that you're just really passionate about?
Well, I think in general, the therapist that just makes the connection is the most powerful therapist in the world, no matter what discipline they are, whether it's a counselor or OT. So that's something I'm really good with. But the cool thing about OT is that we get to have fun with what we do. So, we're not talk therapists. And so I love being creative and coming up with fun ways to work on problem solving. So instead of just having a chit chat or, pulling up some cards, what would you do in such and such situation? We might make the human board game where we take the floor and we put spaces on the floor and we're the little game pieces and we roll a big dice and, you land on a space and then you pick the card and say, okay, how would we handle this? Or does this have a small solution or a big solution? What kind of problem is that? So a lot of the concepts that we might teach kids, I get to make them fun. So that's what I especially love.
That sounds fun. And I think it's great to combine that with talk therapy and everything, because talk therapy was not, there were times when it was effective, but it's not something that even works particularly well with me right now. And where I need like that, take me outside to throw rocks or paint something, or, something that's, and I think some even, children are little humans too, and they need different types of things as well. And so I think that that's amazing that you can bring that into that space for them where they can do something that's an outlet that makes them feel safe when talking might not be it. Especially I'm assuming for a lot of the autistic children as well, it might be easier to get through to them through doing something, right, as opposed to talking.
Right. Yep.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate your perspective that you brought to the table today, Alicia. And I would love to know if you could tell everybody where they can find you and if you have anything you'd like to share about what you're working on right now.
So I can be reached by email. It's alicia@selfregulationsupports.com. So you can find me on LinkedIn as well. My self-regulation supports website is geared more towards therapists, but I hope to have a parent training on there too. It's still kind of in the works. And then my book hopefully will be coming out maybe October, early November, somewhere in there. So I'm just finishing up the last edits with that.
Very exciting. So this will be coming out right before the book comes out, and definitely keep us up to date with that. And we would love to share that information with our audience for you. And it was great to have you here today, Alicia.
It's been great to be here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, you guys, this is another fantastic episode today. I want to thank our guests. I want to thank Tim Kellis and also Alicia Kollmar. Thank you both for being here today. Thank all of you for watching or listening wherever you are in the world. And until next week, I want to remind you to make every day a great day for a breakthrough. We'll see you next time.
Tuning in to another episode of The Breakthrough. Please visit our website at www.thebreakthroughshow.com and be sure to join our app